You're lying in bed at 2 a.m., and the thunder just cracked so loud your windows rattled. Your phone's already lighting up. A severe weather alert, sirens somewhere in the distance, the dog hiding under the bed like the world is ending. And here's the thing that's almost funny. Even with a concrete roof, insulated walls, and an app that tells you exactly when the storm will pass, you're still a little scared. So picture this same storm 10,000 years earlier. No walls, no roof that isn't made of branches and hide, no forecast. Just a family crammed into a cave mouth, watching the sky rip itself apart with absolutely no idea when it would stop, or if it would. So what did they actually do? The answer isn't just hide and wait. It's stranger and far more human than that. Let's get one myth out of the way first, because most people picture ancient storm survival completely wrong. They imagine cavemen cowering in the dark, paralyzed with fear, waiting for lightning to pick them off one by one. But that's Hollywood, not archaeology. Storms weren't rare interruptions to ancient life. They were a predictable, recurring part of it, and predictable danger gets prepared for, not just panicked over. Archaeologists studying sites like the Abri Pataud rock shelter in France, occupied roughly 20,000 years ago, have found something telling. Hearths positioned deep inside shelter overhangs, angled specifically to stay lit and dry even when wind and rain hit the entrance. That's not blind panic, that's engineering. Ancient humans weren't just enduring storms. In a lot of ways, they were already outsmarting them. But here's where it gets strange. Shelter itself wasn't a last-minute scramble. It was often built with storms already in mind, long before the clouds ever showed up. Anthropologists studying groups like the Sand People of southern Africa have documented how temporary shelters were deliberately positioned, using terrain, wind patterns, and drainage in mind, sometimes using windbreaks made of branches angled to redirect gusts around, not through, the living space. Excavations at sites like Terra Amata in France, dated to around 400,000 years ago, even show evidence of oval hut structures with post holes and central hearths, meaning storm-conscious construction isn't a modern invention. It's something hominins were doing before Homo sapiens even existed. So the real question isn't whether ancient humans feared storms. It's what they did with that fear that mattered, and that's where things get genuinely fascinating. Now here's the part nobody talks about. A storm doesn't just threaten your shelter, it threatens your food, and that fear shaped entire survival strategies long before the first drop fell. Many hunter-gatherer societies developed keen weather-reading skills, watching cloud formations, animal behavior, and wind shifts to predict incoming storms hours, or even a day in advance. Researchers studying Indigenous Australian communities have documented detailed traditional ecological knowledge systems where changes in bird flight patterns, ant behavior, and cloud color were used as reliable storm indicators passed down through generations. This wasn't superstition dressed up as science. It was applied pattern recognition refined over thousands of years, tested against real consequences, because the cost of guessing wrong wasn't a wet picnic. It was starvation or exposure. In other words, weather forecasting didn't start with satellites. It started with somebody's grandmother noticing that when the ants moved to higher ground, you'd better move too. But wait, what about the storms nobody could predict? The sudden ones, the ones that rolled in too fast for any warning sign to catch? Surely those were pure terror, pure chaos every time. And to be fair, yes, sometimes they were. Flash floods and sudden storms absolutely killed ancient people, and archaeological and geological records show catastrophic flood events reshaping entire settlements throughout prehistory. This isn't a story where ancient humans had some secret power that made them immune to nature's worst moments. They didn't. People died. Camps were destroyed. But what set these communities apart wasn't the absence of disaster. It was what they did in the after. And that after is where something remarkable starts to show up in the archaeological and anthropological record. Because storms, it turns out, weren't just survived. They were remembered, retold, and eventually turned into something bigger than the event itself. Anthropologist Patrick Nunn has spent years studying what he calls geomyths, oral traditions that appear to encode real natural disasters, sometimes passed down with startling accuracy for thousands of years. Aboriginal Australian oral traditions describe coastline changes and flooding events that align disturbingly well with sea level data from over 7,000 years ago, long before written language existed anywhere on Earth. Think about that for a second. A storm, a flood, a moment of pure chaos and fear, and instead of vanishing when the water receded, it got folded into a story, repeated around a fire, passed from a grandparent's mouth into a grandchild's memory, surviving 7,000 years without a single page of paper. We built weather satellites to predict the next storm. They built stories that outlived hundreds of storms, still doing their job millennia later. That's the moment worth sitting with. A storm destroys a shelter, but a story rebuilds the shelter in memory. A storm scatters a family in the dark, but a story gathers that same family back together at the fire. A storm takes something from a community, and a story hands something back, meaning warning, connection, long after the floodwater is gone and the thunder has moved on to someone else's sky. That's not just survival. That's a species turning its worst nights into its longest-lasting inheritance. So maybe the real difference between them and us isn't that they feared storms less. It's that their fear had somewhere to go. Think about what a storm actually is for you right now. It's a notification, a slight inconvenience, maybe a flickering light, maybe a canceled flight, maybe a mildly annoyed tweet about the Wi-Fi going out. It rarely demands anything from you except waiting it out with a fully charged phone. For them, a storm demanded everything: attention, cooperation, memory, sometimes courage, sometimes grief. And it left something behind every time: a better sheltered design, a sharper eye for warning signs, a story worth telling twice. We've engineered storms down to a minor inconvenience. In doing that, we may have also engineered away the things storms used to give us: a reason to gather close, together, and actually pay attention to each other until it passed. Now, it's worth being honest here, because this isn't a story about ancient humans being fearless or somehow more spiritually attuned than we are. Storms genuinely terrified them, and for good reason. Hypothermia, flash floods, lightning strikes, collapsed shelters, and disrupted food supplies were all real. Constant threats, and plenty of ancient communities were devastated by weather events they never saw coming. There's no romantic spin that erases that. What's different isn't the fear itself. It's that fear back then had nowhere to hide behind a screen or a notification. It had to be processed out loud, together, in real time, with people whose survival depended on paying attention to the same sky you were. And that distinction actually explains something modern psychologists have picked up on. Researchers studying disaster response and community resilience, including work coming out of environmental psychology, have repeatedly found that shared communal experiences of danger tend to strengthen social bonds and collective coping more effectively than isolated ones. Ancient storm survival was almost never a solitary event. It happened shoulder to shoulder, huddled at a cave mouth or under a lean-to, listening to the same wind, flinching at the same thunder, and then once it passed, talking about it together until the fear turned into something more manageable: a story, a lesson, a shared memory instead of a private terror. We now often ride out storms alone, scrolling through other people's reactions to the same rain we're sitting in, physically together with no one and emotionally borrowing a crowd we'll never actually meet. So no, ancient humans weren't fearless in the face of a storm. And they definitely weren't just standing outside daring lightning to strike them, waiting for it all to pass with a shrug. They built shelters angled against the wind. They read the sky the way we read headlines. They lost people and homes and food stores, and they grieved those losses the way anyone would. But then they did something we've quietly stopped doing as often as we should. They turned the worst nights into their most valuable ones, encoding danger into memory so the next generation wouldn't have to learn it the hard way. They built myths out of thunder. We build group chats that go quiet after the power comes back on. Now think back to that thunder crack that woke you up. Your dog's still hiding. Your phone's still lit up with an alert you'll forget by morning. But somewhere underneath that fear, the exact same fear chemically, biologically, that a person felt 20,000 years ago at a cave mouth, there's an old instinct still running in the background, the urge to not be alone when the sky is doing something you can't control. Maybe that's worth listening to next time. Instead of scrolling through it by yourself. Ancient humans didn't survive storms because they weren't afraid. They survived them because fear, shared, becomes something else entirely. We didn't outgrow the storm. We just started riding it out alone, and forgot that the thunder used to bring us closer together.